Sabah al-Khair, good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni, and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective.
Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered. Today I've got the privilege, the honour to introduce you to another super Palestinian. We've got Susan Abulhawa today with us, who's a Palestinian American writer, human rights activist. She's the founder of a non-governmental organisation, Playgrounds for Palestine. She lives in the States. She's written 3 gorgeous, beautiful books. I'm sure you'll all be very aware of them. Mornings in Jenin, The Blue Between Sky and Water, and her latest novel, Against the Loveless World. Joining us from the States after a tumultuous tour in Australia is Susan Abulhawa. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, Nasser. Thanks for having me.
No, an absolute pleasure, Susan. Susan, whenever we have a new guest, we'd like them to speak about their Nakba story. How about you share yours with us?
Well, mine is a Naksa story because my family was expelled in 1967. We do have family from Haifa. My grandfather was part-time Haifan, but we're all from a village called Tur in Jerusalem. And both of my parents and my grandmother, my uncles and my aunties, we were all kicked out during the 1967 war. Some of my aunts and uncles actually were able to get back in the immediate aftermath, and those stories are kind of legendary in our family. One of my aunts walked back with 4 small children because she was just terrified of the tents that were waiting for us in Jordan. My mother was actually in Germany at the time. She got a scholarship to study dental hygienist, and she wasn't able to return, like anybody who was out of the country at the time could return. Anyway, so she and my father married in Jordan, and then they went to Kuwait, where a lot of Palestinians actually ended up seeking bread, and I was born there. My grandmother actually snuck me back into Jerusalem when I was young, and bit of a long story, but I lived in an orphanage called Dar al-Tifl in Jerusalem. And when I was 13, Israel requires that anyone at the age of 13 or older have papers, whatever, identity cards. And because I wasn't registered anywhere, I ended up, they had me removed. So I came to the States. My father was here in the US, and I've been here since.
Wow. Another story of dispossession and refuge. Susan, we all share those pains, and unfortunately our pain gets exacerbated so many times and compounds so many times. Now, Louise Adler invited you and 9 other Palestinians to the Adelaide Writers' Week. Great credit to her. She's a great humanist and withstood a barrage of abuse from our Zionist media here in Australia. But she held firm and she invited all of you. We ended up, everybody got their visas, everybody got here to Adelaide Writers' Week, but the 3 Palestinians didn't get their visas until 11:59, probably 55 seconds. You were one of those that had to wait until the very last minute to get here. Firstly, before we talk about you getting here, let's talk about the challenges you faced for having a view, a Palestinian view.
Yeah, so it was literally, I think I got news that we had the visa on Thursday and my flight was on Friday. Yeah. So the festival had to book my flights and my hotel and everything in less than 24 hours. And I likewise had to pack, and
crazy.
It really was.
But then before you got here, the Zionists immediately went on the rampage. They trawled your Twitter account. They endeavored to take you down. There was calls for cancellations. Minter Ellis, PricewaterhouseCoopers withdrew their name, but they didn't withdraw their money, interestingly. 3 Ukrainian writers went, we won't dignify this panel by participating if Suzanne's going to be there. She called Zelensky bad words.
Yeah, that part was kind of shocking to me, that writers and supposed intellectuals would identify so strongly with a politician. One thinks, you think writers would be a bit more critical and would have a more nuanced analysis of people who lead leaders who take their people into war and into slaughter, that they would have a more critical analysis, even if they supported the person. But to identify with someone like Zelensky or any leader who has, a politician rather, I shouldn't say leader, who is documented as being corrupt. I mean, he was in the Panama Papers. He ran on an anti-corruption ticket and immediately when he got into office started enriching himself and his cronies and setting up offshore accounts. And we know that he was involved, or at least presided over, the assassinations of multiple journalists, the closing down of newspapers, the banning of opposition parties, of labor unions. I mean, there was a lot of fascist activity that he was, and to have a writer say that she idolizes someone like that was shocking to me. And what was even more troubling is that people extrapolated my criticism of Zelensky to mean that I was cheering for Putin, which I've never made any. I don't cheer for politicians in general. I don't really identify with them. I don't have that predisposition, really. And like I said in my statement, I don't need sort of reductionist narratives of good versus evil or black and white to make sense of the world. I think that's intellectually lazy, which was, kind of, it was the thing that prevailed in Australian media. They were just writing all kinds of things. Not a single one actually contacted me to get a response. With the exception of Pearls and Iterations, which, they sent me like 3 questions and I answered them and they posted those responses right away. But otherwise, I think before I came, there were 7 or 8 op-eds and articles making claims about me that were false and sort of in decontextualizing the things that I had said. The things I say about Israel, about Israelis, about Israeli soldiers, don't come out of a very different context than what Europeans understand. For us, the people we're talking about are the people who destroyed us and are destroying us, the people who kill our children, the people who drag, our parents and siblings and children out of their beds in the middle of the night, the people who demolish our homes, who harass us at checkpoints, who, ban us from our country. There are, in my opinion, no words harsh enough to describe that country and the people who serve its military and serve its various institutions. And I would never make any apology for calling them anything, whether it's Nazi criminals, abhorrent, and all the other things that your media took me to task for. And I think it's interesting in that, and I said this in one of the interviews, that the journalists and politicians object to our reaction to terrorism that's perpetrated against us. They police what we say and the tone we use to talk about our tormentors. But there's no acknowledgement, there's no attention to the actual institutionalized terrorism and apartheid that Palestinians are subjected to. And that's, it's hard to take anybody seriously whose moral compass is so blatantly skewed. And I think these people exist in a moral vacuum, quite frankly. So it's hard to take them seriously, and or to give them really any kind of weight or credibility.
I'm sure you'll remember, as we all did, when the bombing first started in Ukraine, all of the white reporters reporting, these people are civilized. They have Netflix accounts, You should care. These aren't just brown people that nobody cares about. And that's the narrative. That's where we exist, in that space where, George Bush #1, Iraq 1, where we became collateral damage 200 kids killed in a hospital or a school was collateral damage. We're not humanized in their eyes. One of the really disturbing things, and this mainstream media is getting found out increasingly every day and becoming less and less relevant, which is why all of the Palestinian sessions were sold out, booked out, why you spoke to packed rooms, Susan, why people were sitting on wet grass to listen to you, is because the same people that talk about free speech and not cancelling right-wing voices, about letting Islamophobes and, the most horrific white supremacists into this country, the moment we move outside of that narrative, well, they're the first people to say, you should be cancelled in particular. Have you ever faced that level of cancellation or vitriol before?
It was pretty intense in Australia. I mean, I have faced it in the past, but this was, it's been a while, since it's been so intense and concentrated. I wanted to kind of reiterate what you said about how blatantly hypocritical the media was when the bombing first happened in Ukraine, because reporters, honestly, it was a moment of vindication for a lot of us, because we have been saying for a long time that they don't see us as human. They don't see us as worthy. They hold our lives in contempt. And of course, they would deny that. But the minute Ukraine was attacked, of course, they were saying, this isn't Iraq. This isn't Libya. This is Europe. And then you would, there was that one lady whose voice started cracking.
Cracking up, yeah.
This is Europe. Like these people, you know what I mean? And I just, it was disgusting. It was really disgusting, but it kind of, it validated what we have been saying all along. And, and then it just kind of, it continued. And I think they started to temper themselves a little bit. But even with that, even with the public sort of backlash against the hypocrisy, they would still slip. And what's interesting is that it spanned all media outlets in the West. So it's almost like it's a class consciousness. Mm-mm. Or it's a racial consciousness, rather, I should say.
Of course it is.
Because it's not like there was a memo that was sent out, or it's not, all white people got together and they said, that this is what we're going to say. No, but there is they have a shared consciousness that does not include our humanity. It does not. So, and I think that's part of what we saw in Australia. That was part of the backlash against me and Muhammad al-Kurd. And they also didn't want the others, but they couldn't find anything juicy on Sari or Ramzi Baroud, But believe me, they wanted to cancel them and they didn't want them there. And they had trouble with their visas as well.
So, and speaking in that space, you remember early on a screenshot or a picture of Ahad al-Tamimi fighting the Israeli soldier before she got imprisoned. They went, look at this Ukrainian girl fighting for...
Oh, yeah.
And then they went, oh, shit, she's a Palestinian. Delete. No apology, no rectification, no parallel drawn by any reporter. And even in our lobbying work, I sat with this right-wing senator and he'd made a visit to the Ukraine. And I said, the determination of an indigenous people to fight an occupier, it's inspirational, isn't it? And he was, all gung-ho. This is a guy with pictures of himself next to tanks, And he said, yeah, it's inspirational. And, what we've got to do is keep arming the Ukrainians so they can defeat this Russian threat. I said, yeah, just like the Palestinians, fighting for their indigenous people, fighting for their self-determination. He goes, oh, no, it's a bit more complex there. I said, it's no more complex at all. I want to speak to the language that, and particularly David Bevan. I'll put a link, listeners, in the podcast to John Menadew's piece interviewing Susan, but also her YouTube statement, and to a link to David Bevan, who's the ABC morning broadcaster, I think, in South Australia in Adelaide. And you should listen to this because we expect a bit more from the ABC, but David here was trying to be some sort of Sky News hack. He was endeavouring to trap you, Susan, to corner you into a space where, as Palestinians, we have to be polite. And we have to humanize our occupiers in some way. I mean, you said it before. They kill our kids. They imprison and beat our parents. They, each of us has parents buried in strange soil away from their ancestral homes and their parents. With all the crimes of the occupation, everything that's done to us, we have to be polite, and they get stuck on a single word like garbage.
Yeah. And that was actually the word that he was, sort of berating me about, because I used that word garbage. It was interesting too, because he was spouting this Zionist narrative that the soldier who was killed was just a guy on his way to a wedding. And of course, I called him out on that, and I said, he wasn't just a guy on his way to a wedding. I said he's an American guy who left his privileged life in the United States. He's a white guy who went to another people's country to serve in an occupation military with one of the worst human rights records in the world, in order to oppress the indigenous people, and he got killed by them. And I said to David, you know that. Why, but he wouldn't admit it. And it was just, he kept going back. He said, well, and then he said, but he wasn't oppressing when he was killed. Like, it was so absurd. It was so absurd. As if like he had to be in uniform in order for it to be okay. You know what I mean? Like, as if his crimes and everything in that whole context is erased because he happened to be. It's kind of like saying, well, Nazi soldiers, well, they weren't doing anything on Sunday. So what they did on Saturday and for the year before that doesn't count on that Sunday when he's not in uniform. Like, what is this logic? But and this is my point. The amount of mental gymnastics that they have to go through in order to paint us as villains is truly impressive. I mean, even, the Ukrainian writer, that there's a line in what she wrote that said, even what I have learned is that anti-war can mean pro-genocide.
What?
I mean, like, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, what kind of intellectual acrobatics do you have to sort of, flip through in order to arrive at such an absurdity? Being anti-war means pro-genocide. Like, it's pretty straightforward. The world does not want an escalation of this war. I would say the majority of humanity, even Europe, and opinions are changing in this country as well. Like, we want a different conversation. We don't want the conversation of more and more and more and more weapons to Ukraine. We don't want that. We don't want to continue to just light every part of our planet on fire. And that's what the United States wants.
Yeah, the best thing is brown people killing brown people if you're the United States. The second plan is white people killing brown people. And if we have to, white people killing white people. But ideally, can we get some brown people killing brown people? We can sell them both guns,
Yeah. Well, as long as somebody's making money selling guns, and it's big business. War is big business.
Huge business.
And the idea is to keep it going.
You spoke about the mental gymnastics of this Ukrainian writer. How you can be anti-war and pro-genocide. She's not a writer's whatever, that she can put those words together. Nobody's ever conceptualize putting those words next to each other. But then we spoke earlier before we came on air about the mental gymnastics of being a Zionist. From way back when Theodore Herzl writing to Cecil Rhodes saying, I'm writing to you about something colonial, something you'll be really excited about. I'm not talking about Africa. I'm talking about Europe and the Middle East, to where they are today. Why don't you take us on that little bit of a journey?
Well, look, it's the same mentality as Nazis. It's the same mentality as white supremacists, as the Klan. It's, when you have that amount of power over people who are essentially defenseless, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about people who are like that. I think they exist in a kind of moral vacuum, to be honest. And a place where there is no conscience. Mm-hmm. And I would hate to be them precisely for that reason. I think that they are, they're morally bankrupt as a nation. And, I saw that, they're having all these protests now because Jews might experience a small fraction of what they have been pushing, visiting on us for 75 years. And one of the placards said, we were silent about occupation and now we have a dictatorship. And of course, that doesn't even get in. the reality. But like that's the level of awareness that's the most you can hope from them.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing now is actually Zionism manifest. It's not actually complete yet. I mean, we have suffered the burden of Zionism manifest, but the world is increasingly getting to see what it actually is: a racist, supremacist movement, as evil as every other one that ever existed. I had an argument with a politician recently. Many of these politicians are groomed, obviously, at university level, and they're spotted by the Zionist lobby as potential leaders and taken on Rambam tours and what have you. And they buy into this anti-Semitic myth. And this guy said to me, I mean, if you just taught your kids not to hate,
oh Jesus,
just that straight up. And I said to him, I said, do you think that we hate Jews just because they're Jews? I wouldn't care if they were Buddhists, Sikhs, Christians, Muslims. If you take my house, I'm going to hate you. How you celebrate God is removed from the fact that you denied me my home, killed my father, raped my mother, stole my orchards and business. That's the issue. It's got nothing to do with anyone's religion.
And it's humiliating to actually have to be in that position where you have to explain that, right? I mean, I actually don't. I mean, kudos to you for even indulging those kinds of conversations. I just don't, because I just find people like that just really lowly, to be honest, and just intellectually, frankly, stupid. If somebody who hears that and just believes it wholesale is without any kind of critical thought is just, I mean, how do you reason? How do you talk to somebody like that? I can't. It's just too frustrating for me. And which is why I write books. If people read, if people want to learn, they can read. And I do my part to give them something to go to. The teaching your children to hate has been one of Israel's tropes for a very long time. But ironically, the U.S. State Department did a study on, because for years and years they've been saying, oh, they're textbooks. The U.S. State Department did a study on Palestinian textbooks and Israeli textbooks, as did an Israeli scholar by the name of Nurit
Peled.
Yeah. Yes, you've seen her book. She did a pretty exhaustive study of Israeli textbooks as well. And in both cases, the conclusion was that, in fact, Israeli textbooks promulgate hate, racism, and militarism against Palestinians, whereas there was no evidence of anything of that Israel claimed in Palestinian textbooks. So, they accuse us of things that they themselves are guilty of. But our kids don't need to be taught to hate Israelis. Frankly, it's kind of like you said. I mean, they make us hate them with everything that they do. I mean, anybody ruling over you, it's kind of like thinking that enslaved people need to be taught to hate the people whipping them or enslaving them, stealing their labor and stealing their lives. We don't need to be taught that.
Now, as Palestinians, we generally and overwhelmingly, the majority of us are wonderful activists, and we have intersectional activities across a number of different ranges. You do some wonderful work around animal rights in the States. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, I work for human rights and of course, animal rights. I think that the liberation of non-human nations is inextricable from human liberation, frankly. I mean, I think the industrialized farming is really industrialized level terrorism. It's horrendous and unspeakably cruel. The destruction of habitats, the disrespect of other beings on this planet is sometimes unbearable to witness. All of white supremacy, racism, it all begins with human supremacy, this idea that other animals are lesser beings, and therefore everything that they have is within our purview to take. And I think part of one's moral evolution is to understand that and to repudiate it. You know, Islam was the first. It was the first time that people had an ideology of mercy for animals. I mean, that's the whole concept of halal. And it was to show mercy to animals and kindness. And the Quran is replete with examples of that. I mean, there's, one surah in which a woman was granted immediate and unqualified access to heaven because she helped a dog who was injured and thirsty. So, and of course, unfortunately, like, Muslims don't necessarily adhere to those things anymore. And I think a lot of people forget the spirit of Islam, but it is predicated on mercy, and kindness towards animals. And my sensibility doesn't necessarily come from Islam, but I wanted to point that out for people, for Muslims, including my own family, who don't really see the value of being an advocate for animals. It's kind of, people think it's a zero-sum game, right? Well, let's just rescue the humans first. And I don't think that's the way. Animals deserve to be free. They deserve to live in their own habitats with their own kind, not to be kidnapped and put into zoos or circuses or experimentation or food. They are their own nations, and they deserve to be respected.
I remember seeing this meme years ago. It was a indigenous Turtle Island person, and he said, if you take all winged creatures out of the earth will die. If you take four-legged animals and crawling animals, the ecosystem will die. Take the trees out, the earth will die. If you take the humans out, the earth lives.
The earth will flourish.
The earth lives.
Yeah. We're parasitic. We're a disease on this planet. I mean, the earth is a living, if you think of the earth as a living organism, we're pathogens.
And certainly capitalism, endeavoring to monetize flora and fauna. Well, in fact, it has monetized flora and fauna. That surely is the beginning of the end there.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say we, right? Because it's not all humans. There are a lot of societies that have created ways of living that are symbiotic with the planet. And I think a lot of indigenous societies in particular have a respect of the natural world and a sense of symbiosis in living in ways that aren't predatory or parasitic. So it's really, as you said, it's a capitalist system that's predicated on extraction, exploitation, and just taking everything.
That was the brilliant Suzanne Abulhawa, who came to Australia for the Adelaide Writers' Week, to much consternation from Zionists all around Australia and the mainstream media. But she came, she saw, she conquered, and spoke to packed audiences. Susan Abulhawa, do yourself a favour, go to the podcast and check out the links to some of Susan's work. I'll be talking in the coming weeks about Nakba 75 years since the Nakba. May 13, a national day of action around Australia. Be sure to save that day, May 13. It's a Saturday. There'll be a national day of action. And to my Muslim brothers and sisters, a blessed and happy Ramadan. And may all your prayers and fasts be accepted, and enjoy the family time. Susan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. We look forward to you coming back to Australia for a longer tour and some holiday time, hopefully.
Inshallah.
Thanks for listening. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Rock and roll.